Selfish politicians, inept investigators, and innocents caught in the middle. We're not talking about every headline in America for the last 3 years. This is World War Z. World War Z is a 2013 zombie horror action flick directed by Mark Forster. This is the guy who brought us Finding Neverland, Christopher Robin, and Stranger Than Fiction, so he's a real horror director. It was written by 4 people. Jay Straczynski took the first draft. Then they brought in Matthew Carnahan to fix it up. And then they brought in the master, the legendary screenwriter, Damon Lindelof. Yes, the man behind Prometheus and Lost. So he started his rewrite, he added a bunch of interesting ideas, and then he left before it was finished. You know, kind of like Lost. So finally they brought in Drew Goddard. You guys know him as the writer and director of Cabin in the Woods, an actual horror writer. And I'm pretty certain he is the person that we should be thanking for the final product that we did get. Now, the movie is based off of the book by the same name, World War Z, by the genius that is Max Brooks. Now, unfortunately, the movie and the book have 0 similarities other than the title. That's pretty much it. There's no similarity in the format or the storytelling or the characters or anything. The movie is completely different. So I guess we at least don't have to be disappointed by the movie not following the book too much because it doesn't use the book at all. You can just watch it as its own thing, so bonus. The music is by Hans Zimmer. Just kidding. The music is by Marco Beltrami. Now, he actually is a pretty good composer when it comes to horror. He did Velvet Buzzsaw, he did A Quiet Place, he did The Shallows. Hell, he even did the music for Fortnite. It was edited by Roger Barton, who did the Transformers sequels, Speed Racer, and The Grey. Cinematography is by the Oscar and BAFTA award-winning Robert Richardson. This is the guy who shot Inglourious Bastards, Hateful Eight, and Shutter Island. The movie stars Brad Pitt and Muriel Enos, whom you guys will know from The Killing. So the premise of the film is the world's being taken over by super fast moving zombies. And the only person who can save humanity is former United Nations investigator Jerry Lane. His mission is to lead a team to find out where it started so they can hopefully find a cure. So as you guys know, when I talk about movies, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This movie doesn't really have any ugly, so I'm just going to talk about the good and the bad. That being said, let's get to the good. This movie doesn't waste any time getting into the action. About 3 minutes after the intro sequence, it just goes all out balls to the walls action. The action is pretty fun to watch and it happens on this huge scale. You see whole cities just getting destroyed by zombies. One of the first things you'll notice is the sound design and the sound mixing. It's really top notch and it adds a lot of depth and atmosphere to the movie. The designs of the zombies too, how they look and all that stuff is excellent. I love how they move. I love the sounds they make. I love the little mannerisms, all that stuff. The zombies in this film really set themselves apart from other zombie movies. And I think that's because of how fast they are, how maneuverable they are, and the things that they can do. Whether they be football tackling somebody to the ground and then killing them, or, using the different zombies to pile up on each other as a sort of ladder to get over high barriers, they're genuinely scary because in the real world, if these zombies were to attack, there's no way that most of humanity is going to survive. And I think that's demonstrated greatly with the whole opening scene in New York City. Within a matter of minutes, the city goes from perfectly calm to devastated. On a real world note, I can't even imagine the planning and the logistics and all the stuff that went into shooting these scenes in New York. And you can really see how much stuff was involved, how many people were involved, what kind of things had to happen when they do these really beautiful aerial shots and they have this really kick-ass shot from the inside of a helicopter. It just really shows you, man, they took over a whole huge chunk of New York City just to make this happen. And I'm not just talking about the city itself, I'm talking about bridges and hundreds of extras. It's pretty impressive. The cinematography overall, the lighting, the way that they frame things, camera movements, all that stuff is quite nice, especially the lighting in the darker scenes. It's very atmospheric, it's very moody, it helps build the tension, and it adds a lot to the aesthetics and just to the style of the movie overall. There's a part in the film where Jerry is getting geared up to go do something, but he doesn't have any high-tech gear, so he's doing like a Jason Bourne thing. He's using magazines and duct tape and all this kind of stuff, and it's realistic, and it's what you would want to do if there was an actual zombie attack. He's really put thought into it, and I like that. One of the things that you'll notice in the movie is there are so many fantastic actors playing these kind of small roles. So I'm not sure if they had bigger roles, in the movie overall before the edit or whatever, but we're talking like tons of stars, especially when it comes to the soldiers. All of the main soldiers in this movie are really fun to watch. The banter is good. They feel like actual soldiers. There's a part towards the beginning of the film where Jerry has to do this thing for his family. He has to make this really quick decision. And when he does it, it's pretty surprising. It was one of the things that actually did surprise me in the film. And it actually made me feel for Jerry. It made me like him a lot more. And it wasn't like some contrived thing. It was something really impressive. And following his act of heroism is when the military comes into play. I love seeing the military in movies. I love seeing military vehicles and soldiers and tactics and all that stuff, but I really love seeing the military in horror movies. The military in horror movies usually go one of two ways. They're really great, they're good people and they're trying to help make a difference, or they're really bad and they're trying to cover up some shit that they started in the first place. Think about The Crazies or The Last of Us. I thought Mariel Enos did a lot with what she was given. She really pulls off playing a concerned mother and a concerned wife. Even Brad Pitt, when he's interacting with the kids, comes off pretty natural. I really enjoyed the character of Dr. Fastbeck. I really wanted to see what he would do, and I really wanted to see him in the movie more. I think things could have gone a whole different way and could have been a lot cooler, to be honest. Once we get further into the movie, you find out that Israel had advanced knowledge of this attack, so they did all these things in preparation. And that really makes sense that they would, because Israel does have an amazing intel service in the Mossad. And it also makes sense that they don't tell anybody, they just worry about themselves, because it's kind of how it is in the real world. I think the CGI in the film actually looks pretty fantastic, especially, when they show these big pile of zombies and all that kind of stuff. I think there's really only one shot in the whole film that really sticks out as kind of off, and that's when they show this female zombie in Israel. And speaking of zombies in Israel, I love the attack scene in Israel. There's so much stuff going on. You've got helicopters flying around, you've got vehicles turning over, you've got hundreds of zombies piling up over the walls, throwing themselves down from heights, and just, man, it's so good. I think it's pretty exciting, and if there had been a little bit more stuff in the movie like that, dispersed throughout, it would have been even better. The movie really is a fast-paced roller coaster ride from start to finish. It does kind of calm down towards the end for this other thing, but I think that's kind of good. It gives you a chance to breathe. And it's not just the pacing, it's also the way that it's cut, the way that they use music. All of that adds to this sense of alacrity. The thing about this movie is there's so much absolutely stupid shit that happens. And in most movies, they would make it just completely unwatchable. Now in this movie, you will find yourself saying things like, why would that happen? What did they do that for? That doesn't make any sense or whatever. But you just gotta kind of turn your brain off and enjoy how it goes. And that's the thing, even though it is fairly stupid, it's also pretty watchable. And I think that's why it's the most successful zombie movie of all time, and it's Brad Pitt's most successful movie of all time. And I think that last one's a little bit sad because Brad Pitt's been in some pretty great movies. I will say they did pretty well with this movie considering all of the things that happened. You had the one major shoot, then you had a reshoot, then you had another reshoot. You had 4 different versions of the script. So for it to be this smooth and this cohesive, I think it's pretty good. So that's what I thought was good about World War Z. Now let's talk about the bad. Oh look, it's an introduction using real-world clips and news clips and clips of people and animals and violence to set the tone for the rest of the film. I've never seen that before. And even better, you get to meet the family straight away in a really fun, intimate scene, so you really identify with them and they get your hooks into you and you really want to see them make it. That hasn't been done before either. This movie loves super obvious setups and payoffs, and I'm talking very obvious setups. Whether it be using stuff that people say, whether it be using flashbacks or objects, you see everything coming except for 1 or 2 things from a million miles away. I think the Lane family is the luckiest family on the planet because every single time something happens to them, something else good happens to them. No matter how many things are inconvenient, something else convenient happens just for the Lane family. And speaking of the Lane family, let's talk about Jerry Lane a little bit, right? He is this world famous UN investigator, but he is so inept in so many parts of this movie. I've never seen such a smart person do so much dumb shit in the course of a film. The kids acting in this movie is so flat and boring. You never feel fear, you never feel sadness, you don't feel anything for them. There's no excitement, they're just there. You don't see any real screaming, you don't see any crying, you don't see anything like that from them. They are strictly boring ass place markers to make little things happen in the plot. The product placement in this movie is fantastic. It's probably the best I've seen since Transformers. It is everywhere you look. There are certain things they say that are positive or that can lead to something good, and a lot of times when they say these things, they show a product in the foreground or the background. So it's almost like they're saying, if you use this product, everything's going to be okay. I think Pepsi must have made a deal with any company that does zombie movies because they were all up in this just like they were in 28 Days Later. Probably even more so, but it was just more tacked on in this. Hell, even in 28 Days Later, they make a joke about how drinking all that Pepsi and eating all that chocolate can be bad for you and give you headaches and stuff. But there's no jokes like that in here because Pepsi will help you when the zombies invade. Real quick, going back to the kids, this isn't about their acting. This is more about the characters. Tell your kids to shut the fuck up because they're not tiny infants. You know, they can control whether or not they're crying or yelling or screaming or whatever. Now, granted, they do almost none of that in the movie because, like I said, they're emotionless robots. But still, get them to be quiet. They do say one time, be quiet like a ninja, and of course, they do not. But honestly, it kind of makes sense because as much as they can't keep their mouth shut, Jerry Lane can't see anything coming ever, whether it's a giant garbage truck or a zombie right in front of his face. He never sees anything until it's too late. But I think that's really systemic to the whole movie because a lot of the stuff is exaggerated in this film, like how fast kids and people who are tired can move from these super fast zombies. Then you have no audio or visual cues for things that are about to happen, which you would definitely hear or see coming from quite a bit away. You've got the world's brightest road flares. You've got a doll that's super loud and super articulate. You can hear everything it says perfectly. There's just a lot of stuff in this film that wouldn't really jive in real life. There's a lot of moments for cool things to happen and to get further into the story and build up tension and build up more awareness of what's going on globally. But they rush through everything, and that really starts from the beginning of the film, but it kicks in when they get to this boat. When they get to the boat, they show these little clips of people talking to other people around the world and military guys talking about things, and it just feels really rushed. For some reason, all of the higher-ups in the government and the military seem to be real dickheads. Like they have no empathy at all for people. Now, they are going to have certain mission requirements, and they're going to be focused on getting that mission done, but they are people too. They're not robots. They will show some emotion. They will care about people. That is, of course, unless they're complete twats, which they are in this movie. And a quick side note about the higher-ups in the military, when someone says, room tench hut, the civilians don't stand up. Or should I say they don't have to. And in this movie, every single person in the room stands up and stands at attention, even the regular civvies. And before the big mission begins, there's this really emotional, touching part. But it keeps getting interrupted by these really weird swipe cuts. You know what I mean by a swipe cut is when somebody walks by and it cuts in closer, it goes to something else. They do that like 3 times during the scene, and it's so distracting. That kind of stuff works great in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World or other action films, but not during some emotional goodbye. And one of the things that I thought was weird once the mission starts is there's a team of operators that are sent in with the doctor and with Brad Pitt to protect them. 4 operators, that's it. So you have 4 people to protect these guys on the most important mission on the planet? Something else that rubbed me the wrong way about some of the military stuff definitely involved the C-130. I'm sorry, but it's impossible to refill a C-130 Hercules in 45 seconds. Okay, maybe they're not trying to fill it up all the way. They're only trying to fill it up enough to get from Korea to Israel. But even if they did get this Herc filled all the way up, it wouldn't make it from South Korea to Israel. That would take like a full load of fuel and an aerial refuel on the way. Now remember, I'm not just talking on my ass. I was an actual airport firefighter in Air Force Special Operations Command's headquarters at AFSOC at Hurlburt Field, Florida, and our specialization on the airfield was C-130s, both your standard Hercules and the Spectre gunship. And speaking of C-130s, you're telling me that Brad Pitt's character, who's not only this amazing investigator and a top-notch medic for some reason, who's never been in the military, can now fly a C-130 because he took a Cessna class? If you've actually seen the inside of a C-130, there are so many knobs and dials and throttles and everything else. There's no way he's just jumping in and flipping buttons and everything else and flying away, whether or not he had a pilot with him or not. He'd have to take a second and look. One of the biggest things that irked me about this movie is they have all these amazing side characters. They have way more personality and more interesting lines than our main characters do. But the problem is they don't give you enough time with them. And when you really start to get involved with them, they kill them off. So you are kind of like bummed out about it. But if they had just given you a little bit more time with them, a little bit more interactions and all that kind of stuff, it would have had the impact that they wanted it to have, because it really kind of, it doesn't fall flat, but you're really like, man, man, I would have liked to have seen that character a bit more to see what they do and how they work with, Jerry or whatever. Basically, most of these characters just serve one purpose. They're really fun, exciting exposition dumps. They say everything that you and Jerry need to know, and then they get murdered. This is one of those movies where so much stuff happens where you're just like, come on, really? It's pretty much impossible to turn off your suspension of disbelief in this film, and you could try as hard as you want, but something always happens that brings you back. And a big one is the stuff that happens in Israel. The gates, these tunnels, how far do they go? Where are these buses coming from? How are they dropping people off? The buses aren't armored. How are they getting in safely? How did the rest of the world not notice that Israel was building these giant walls and they did it within like a week or two? Why didn't Israel tell everybody else about this information? Why is it every time Jerry goes somewhere, it gets completely destroyed? Up until Jerry got there, everything was fine, but when he gets there, everything goes to shit. It's almost as if everything in the movie revolves around Jerry specifically. Without Jerry, nothing would exist, nothing would happen. So not only is he our protagonist, he's the antagonist too, which is a shame because, again, getting to know these areas, these locations, these characters better, to see the dynamic of what's happening with the zombies and the humans and everything else would have been way cool. But here's the thing, everything in this movie just happens to progress the plot further. Nothing happens just organically or on its own. It's always just bang, 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 plot progression, moving, new location. Ooh, a new piece of information, gotta go. Otherwise, how do you explain so many super smart people doing such super stupid shit? We're talking about side characters, we're talking about leaders, we're talking about Jerry, we're talking about Jerry's family. All these people who seem intelligent just do the most dumb shit, and you'll be sitting there thinking, why would they do that? Why did that happen? Oh, because if he didn't do that or she didn't do that, then this next thing wouldn't happen. And that's pretty much every time except for one great surprise. Also, a PG-13 zombie movie? Come on, man. I know they had to recoup their money because they spent like $170 million to make this movie, and they originally had projected only like $100 million, but because of reshoots and all that crazy shit that happened, it was like $170 million or something. Now, they did go on to bring their money back, and that's because the movie was PG-13, which honestly kind of sucks. Not that they made their money back. Great. I want them to make their money back so that maybe they can make a great sequel, which, by the way, they are, and David Fincher's directing it. Oh, it's going to be so good. But that's besides the point. The fact that there is no blood, there is no viscera, there's no guts, there's nothing like that, it really takes away from the savagery of the zombies and the savagery of the humans trying to kill the zombies. It's just flat, man. It's a movie for kids, basically. And speaking of kids, some of the stuff that happens in this movie feels like it was written by a child. Especially the fact that every time they go somewhere, pretty much every single person except for the main characters die. It reminded me of like True Detective season 2 when they had that big amazing shootout, and at the end, magically the only people out of all those people left alive are our main actors. There's a certain part in this movie where something happens with one of the doctors who works for the World Health Organization, and it's completely out of nowhere. It's really dumb. It makes no sense whatsoever. I was a hazmat technician, actually a hazmat train the trainer. I was the guy who trained people how to train others in hazardous materials, right? So I did the full-on level A bubble suit like you see, in Quarantine and all those kind of movies. So I'm sitting here watching this doctor do something without any body substance isolation, or as we call it, BSI. This WHO doctor is using minimal BSI, like gloves and goggles, to handle one of the most deadly contaminants on the planet? That shit makes no sense whatsoever, but again, it's a device to move the plot forward. There are two things that really irked me about the end of the movie. The music, this big orchestral swell, and it's supposed to be uplifting and all this stuff, but it's just really hammy and overdone, and you feel like, geez, dude, we get it. And that really stuck out to me because for most of the movie, the score kind of complements what's going on in the film. It can be a bit generic at times, and in this time, it's too much, especially for the images you're seeing. The images aren't like a big thing, but the music's just like, whoa. It's so tacky. It's an 80s style, like freeze frame, and you're just like, come on, man, a freeze frame, really? Is this like an 80s sports movie like Rocky 3 or some shit? So those are my thoughts on World War Z, the movie. When you take into consideration everything that happened during production and all of the hiccups and everything else, for what came out of it, it's pretty solid. So that being said, what is my score? Drum roll, please. 5 out of 10.